maybe this is a good transition into what I got wrong, because I think it's really unwise for anybody, especially in media, to mock anybody else for their predictions.
Who do we think we are?
No, I mean, sincerely, actually, I was going to start by saying one of the things that I was told before going on cable news for the first time years ago was never say, I don't know. I think I had done a practice and I said, I don't know. And that sounded really wrong to me then, and it's very wrong. I can say that confidently. It's a very wrong thing now, because from my perspective at the time, as a viewer, I wanted to know when people, I grew up in the age of reality TV. I want to know when somebody doesn't know the answer to the question. I'd much rather the transparency than some like hackneyed approach where you're stumbling and stammering to find some BS that you can spin and, just go back to the green room and grab another Nespresso. So I don't mind that at all. And I'm happy to always say when I don't know something, because again, as a viewer, that's what I like. So let's get to what I don't know. Let's get to what I got wrong. I'll start with polls. So I assumed that polls were undercounting Trump voters, and that people like Trafalgar, who had corrected for those undercounts in years past, were at least somewhat closer to reality. You had Trafalgar saying that what they did right in 2016 and 2020 was pick up on this sort of stealth Trump voter who didn't want to talk to pollsters, and who was, and they said actually after Biden's semi-fascist speech in Philadelphia, they were picking up on a lot of people just not wanting to identify as a Trump voter because they didn't want to identify themselves in a way that could harm them in the future or something like that. There was just not a lot of trust in pollsters, not a lot of willingness to talk to pollsters. So I actually assumed that the Trafalgar polls, which caused a lot of folks in the media to say we could be looking at a red tidal wave, I assumed that those were correcting in a way that was closer to reality, not necessarily on the dot, but closer to reality by correcting for undercounting of that sort of stealth Trump voter. Now, Trump wasn't on the ballot, and it seems that might be something that makes a really big difference on that count. So secondly, now we go to the youth vote, which, as we're sort of starting to look through the numbers, Charlotte Alter had a couple of good tweets about this. It was on par with 2018, which was very high. It's still second to 2018 in terms of youth turnout by the numbers we have so far. But in key battleground states, it was very much the same as 2018. So I underestimated, one, the degree to which abortion, democracy, and student loan relief could have on youth and swing voters. Then two, the degree to which Republicans would be harmed by their lack of an economic agenda, because, this is point three, this is a 3-point what I got wrong, the economic picture, crime problems, and cultural radicalism seemed sufficiently dire as to offset the losses that would be caused, for instance, by gains to Democrats, from voters animated by the issues of abortion, animated by student loan debt relief, and animated by those, especially if you're looking at like Tim Michels in Wisconsin or Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, the democracy question, right? So I assumed that all of that would sort of be offset by those voters who were coming in and saying, listen, democracy to me means a strong economy. Democracy to me means being able to feed my family. That's what I'm voting for first and foremost, and the rest of this is sort of secondary. If you're looking at Michigan, there was an abortion referendum on the ballot there. This is a quote from Alyssa Slotkin, who won re-election in that suburban Michigan district by like a 6-point margin. She was targeted as being very vulnerable. She never thought I'd do, this is from her, she said, I did do an ad on choice. Never thought I'd do one in my life in a pro-life district, but I did do one ad in choice. Then she added, but I did 4 on the economy. So to a point that Crystal makes in Lever News this morning, actually, Democrats running in swing districts or in the Rust Belt, they shifted their focus a bit in certain areas to the economy in recent weeks. in a way that I think really could have made a major difference down the stretch. And not every Democrat focused on abortion, to Slotkin's point. So there was a change in tone, and it actually may have happened in time for people to come down and say, well, actually, yeah, I did hear this candidate talking about the fact that there's some corporate malfeasance at play in inflation. And that really could have been a deciding factor down the home stretch for Democrats that had been, one thing that I was right about, to Ryan's point about taking some victory laps, is that Democrats did have a reason to focus on abortion. This wasn't just being plucked out of nowhere, coming from completely out of touch consultants. The consultants are surely out of touch, but they did have a reason to do that. It's because midterm elections, it's all about turnout. We've been saying that all along here. It's absolutely why the democracy message and the abortion message were being hammered home in ads, in swing districts, because if you can turn out the liberal base, if you can turn out the suburban mom for whom that is the difference between staying home and not voting, it's not even just about getting people to vote for the Democrat, it's about getting people to just get off their couch and get in and vote. That's why they were running on abortion and democracy. I suggested that the democracy message, the abortion message, Democrats would have had a better chance if they had tied it into the economic message, especially when it comes to democracy. But I think some of them actually really did, and in ways that I was not convinced would be as powerful as they ultimately were. Finally, the early vote, oh my goodness, Pennsylvania is the best example of this. I didn't factor that, even though we had the numbers, by the time Dr. Oz debated John Fetterman, that some 700,000+ votes, probably around 750,000 votes had already been cast. 73% of those votes were cast by Democrats. That's about 500,000, that's about 500,000 votes for Fetterman before the debate happened. The margin between Oz and Fetterman ultimately is somewhere north of 200,000 votes. Think about that. If early voting, let's say you take all of those early voting off the table, say early voting had started after that debate, you indeed may be looking at Senator Oz, because you have 500,000 votes cast for Fetterman already, and that margin is still slim. Another thing that I was right about, and I say Ryan and I both were right about, is that the national media didn't like John Fetterman. The national media does not fall for economic populists because, again, Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Need I go on? We can talk about Comcast. We can talk about other folks. But that's just one example of why. And so there was always even before John Fetterman suffered his stroke, there was always this idea that, he wasn't a great candidate. I think that's wrong. I've always thought that's wrong. I said from the beginning, he was one of the best candidates that Democrats had fielded that cycle. And he's especially the perfect foil to Dr. Oz. You could not pick a better person to run against Dr. Oz than John Fetterman. Obviously, his candidacy was weakened enormously.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.